My name is Rowan Brooks. For as long as I can remember, my life has been intertwined with the coastal town of Port Blossom, Oregon. It's a place painted in muted watercolors, the soft gray of the persistent mist, the deep, moody green of the pines that crowd the coastline, and the shifting blues of the Pacific. For a decade, my inner world mirrored this landscape, a perpetual fog that blurred the edges of my own identity, leaving me feeling damp, indistinct, and lost. I wasn't born this way. I have sun-drenched memories of a childhood that felt vibrant and sharp. My grandfather, Arthur, a man with hands as gnarled as driftwood and a laugh that sounded like the tide coming in, was the keeper of that sunshine. We'd spend hours in his workshop behind his small cedar-shingled house, the air thick with the scent of sawdust and sea salt. He was a woodcarver, and he taught me to see the stories hidden in the grain of a fallen birch or the curve of a weathered stone. "Everything has a spirit, Ro," he'd say, his eyes twinkling. "You just have to be quiet enough to listen." I listened. I drew, I painted, I wrote poems about the secret lives of sandpipers. My third-grade teacher, Mrs. Albright, once wrote a note to my parents that I found tucked in an old book years later. It read, "Rowan possesses a rare and beautiful sensitivity. She sees the world with the heart of an artist and the soul of a poet. Nurture this light in her." But around my 15th birthday, that light began to dim. The vibrant colors of my world leached away, replaced by that encroaching fog. It started as a quiet sadness, a weight in my chest I couldn't name. Soon, tears came without warning, sudden squalls that left me exhausted and confused. My thoughts, once clear and bright, became tangled and slow. I'd walk into a room and forget why I was there. I'd start a sentence and lose the words halfway through, a fisherman hauling up an empty net. My parents, Richard and Helen, responded with a flurry of anxious care that felt like being wrapped in a wool blanket on a hot day, suffocating. My father, a man who organized his life with the rigid precision of a spreadsheet, saw my emotional turmoil as a messy variable that needed to be solved. My mother, whose love was a constant, fluttering presence, treated my sadness as a personal failure. "Oh, my sweet girl," she'd murmur, stroking my hair as I cried. Her touch felt less like comfort and more like an attempt to smooth out a wrinkle in a pristine tablecloth. "You've always been so fragile, just like your grandmother's porcelain." "It's this artistic temperament," my father would add, his voice clipped with a familiar, weary authority. "Too many feelings, not enough logic. We need to get you professional guidance, Rowan. Structure. Stability." They found me a therapist, Dr. Finch, a man with a bland smile and a notepad he seemed more interested in than me. They spoke of chemical imbalances and hereditary predispositions. They introduced medications that thickened the fog, slowing my mind until the world felt like it was happening on the other side of a thick pane of glass. I was told I was unwell, that my perceptions were unreliable, my memories faulty. And because I was their daughter, and because the fog made it so hard to find my own thoughts, I believed them. For 10 years, I lived as the person they described, fragile, unstable, a porcelain doll who might shatter at any moment. I took a quiet job at the local library, my days spent in the hushed company of other people's stories because I no longer trusted my own. I was 25 years old and felt ancient, a ghost haunting the edges of my own life. The shift began on a Tuesday in late October, a day like any other, with rain tapping a gentle rhythm on the library's large picture windows. The afternoon mail brought a letter for me, addressed in a crisp, unfamiliar font. It was from a law firm in Portland, Alder and Stone, LLP, embossed in a deep forest green at the top of the heavy, cream-colored paper. I opened it with mild curiosity, expecting a piece of junk mail that had somehow slipped through the cracks. Instead, the words seemed to lift off the page, sharp and clear through the haze. "Dear Ms. Brooks, this letter is to inform you that the trust established by your late grandfather, Mr. Arthur Brooks, has remained dormant for the past 10 years. As stipulated in his will, upon your 20th birthday, you are to assume full and unrestricted access to the principal and all accrued interest. Please contact our offices at your earliest convenience to confirm your personal details and designated financial institution. I read it once, then twice. The rain against the window seemed to fade into a dull hum. A trust fund? My grandfather Arthur, the man who wore flannel shirts until they were soft as silk and whose greatest treasure was a collection of sea-smooth stones, had left me money? It made no sense. He was a humble craftsman, not a man of means. That evening, the fog in my mind felt different. It wasn't a blanket, it was a thin veil, and I could feel a rising wind beginning to tear at its edges. I found my parents in the living room, the television casting a flickering blue light on their faces. My mother was knitting, the rhythmic click of her needles the only sound besides the canned laughter from the screen. My father was reading the paper, a fortress of newsprint held between him and the world. My hand trembled as I held out the letter. My voice was small, barely a whisper. "Mom? Dad? I got this today." My mother put down her knitting, her brow furrowed with a practiced concern. My father lowered his paper, his expression unreadable. He took the letter and read it, his lips a thin, hard line. "We were going to tell you, sweetheart," my mother began, her voice a soft, placating coo. "We were waiting for the right time." The right time. The whisper found a bit of strength. "I turned 25 2 months ago. The letter says it's mine now." My father folded the letter with precise, deliberate movements. "Rowan, you're not in a position to manage something like this," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. It was the same tone he used to explain why I shouldn't travel alone or take on a more demanding job. "Finances are a significant stressor. Your health is our top priority. You're still having your episodes, honey," my mother added, reaching for my hand. Her skin was cool. "Dr. Finch himself agrees that you're not quite stable. It would be irresponsible of us to burden you with this." A name surfaced in my mind, a forgotten anchor in the swirling fog. Dr. Finch hadn't been my therapist for over a year. My parents had found him too permissive and had switched me to someone new, someone they said was a better fit. Dr. Eris Thorne. A strange, cold clarity cut through me. It felt like stepping out of a stuffy room into a blast of cold, clean air. They had lied. It wasn't a protective omission, it was a deliberate, calculated lie, spoken with the ease of long practice. And if they could lie about this, what else had they been lying about? The next morning, I did something the fragile Rowan would never have done. I found Dr. Thorne's number and called his office from the privacy of my small, rented room above a bookstore downtown. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. When his calm, measured voice came on the line, I almost hung up. "Dr. Thorne, it's Rowan Brooks," I managed, my voice shaking. "I have a question. It's a bit strange." "Of course, Rowan. How can I help?" I took a deep breath. "In all the time you've been seeing me, in all your official notes, have you ever diagnosed me with a specific, clinical psychiatric disorder?" There was a silence on the other end of the line. It stretched for so long I thought he had hung up. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, slower, more careful, layered with something I couldn't quite decipher. "Rowan," he said, "my professional relationship began with your parents, who contracted my services on your behalf. But my duty of care is, and always has been, to you as my patient." He paused again. "To answer your question directly, no. I have never given you a formal diagnosis of a long-term psychiatric illness. My clinical notes have consistently indicated that you present with symptoms of situational anxiety and mild, recurring depression, likely exacerbated by your environment." The words hung in the air. Exacerbated by your environment. Then, why do I keep coming? Why the medication? My voice was barely audible. "Your parents authorized and encouraged the continuation of the treatment plan established by your previous provider," he said gently. "They expressed significant concern about what might happen if it were altered. My role, as I saw it, was to provide a safe space for you and to monitor your well-being within the established parameters. But I have, on several occasions, filed reports suggesting a reevaluation of your medication and overall therapeutic approach. Reports they had never mentioned." "Thank you, Dr. Thorne," I whispered and ended the call. I sat on my bed, the phone still in my hand. The fog was gone. In its place was a vast, terrifying, and utterly liberating emptiness. It was the feeling of standing at the edge of a cliff, the ground having crumbled away behind me. For 10 years, I had been living in a story they wrote for me. They hadn't just lied about the money. They had built a cage of doubt and confusion around my mind, bar by bar, diagnosis by diagnosis, and convinced me it was a sanctuary. The grief that washed over me was immense, a tidal wave of sorrow for the girl I had been, and the woman I had never been allowed to become. That night, driven by a new, urgent need for truth, I dug out a dusty wooden chest from the back of my closet. It was the chest my grandfather had carved for me, adorned with swirling patterns of seabirds and kelp. Inside, beneath old paintings and bundles of letters, were my childhood journals. Their covers were faded, the pages filled with the looping, earnest cursive of my younger self. I read for hours, the gentle lamplight illuminating the slow, painful rewriting of my own history. September 12th, age 15, Mom found my sketchbook today. She said the drawings were too dark and that it worried her. She took it. She said she'd keep it safe for me until I was feeling better. I miss it. Drawing makes the quiet feel less lonely. November 3rd, age 16, Dad had a long talk with me after I said I wanted to apply to that art school in Seattle. He said my condition wouldn't handle the pressure. He said staying here, where they could look after me, was the only sensible choice. He's right, I guess. I cried after he left my room. I don't know why. May 21st, age 17, Dr. Finch started me on new pills today. They make my head feel full of cotton. Mom held my hand and said it was for the best. She whispered, "We just want our happy girl back." I'm not sure I remember what she feels like. Reading those entries was like watching a slow-motion theft. They hadn't stolen my joy with a single, violent act. They had siphoned it away, drop by drop, with whispers of concern and gestures of love. They had gaslit me into trading my own vibrant, complicated reality for their pale, manageable version of me. And they had done it to control a legacy my grandfather had left not to them, but to me, a legacy of belief in the very spirit they had tried so hard to tame. A quiet, cold anger began to smolder beneath the grief. It wasn't the fiery rage of a storm, but the steady, enduring heat of deep earth. They had underestimated me. They had seen the sensitive, artistic girl and mistaken her for being weak. They hadn't counted on the fact that the spirit Arthur had nurtured was not extinguished, merely dormant. And now it was beginning to wake up. I didn't storm back to their house. The old Rowan, the one who believed her emotions were a liability, might have dissolved into tears and accusations. This new, emerging version of myself understood that a quiet plan was more powerful than a loud confrontation. My grandfather had taught me to listen. Now I would listen, I would observe, and I would gather the truth. My first step was a call to the law firm. A kind, professional paralegal named Ms. Davies answered my questions. The trust was substantial. My grandfather, a man I'd thought of as simply a humble artist, had quietly invested the proceeds from selling a tract of inland timber property he'd inherited decades ago. He had wanted the money to grow, to be a nest egg that would give me the freedom to pursue my art without worry. The total was just over $500,000. The number was so large it felt unreal. "There's a notation here," Ms. Davies said, her voice turning hesitant. "It seems a clause in the trust was activated about 10 years ago. The emergency guardianship provision." Emergency guardianship? I repeated, my blood running cold. Yes. It allowed for the dispersal of funds for significant medical or living expenses in the event you were deemed incapacitated. It appears your legal guardians at the time, Richard and Helen Brooks, filed for a medical conservatorship, citing a psychological evaluation that declared you incompetent to manage your own affairs. My own breath hitched. The records show regular withdrawals were made over the past decade, allocated to a wellness and care provider named Serene Pathways Holistic Living. Serene Pathways. The name was vaguely familiar. I remembered my parents mentioning it, a specialized retreat center they'd sent me to a few times when my episodes were particularly bad. I'd thought they were quiet, secluded clinics. They were just expensive. The truth was a tapestry of deceit, and I was only just beginning to pull at the threads. I needed help. Not the kind of help my parents had provided, but real, objective guidance. I made an appointment to see Dr. Thorne, not as a patient, but as a client. I met him in his quiet, tastefully decorated office. The air smelled of old books and Earl Grey tea. I laid out the letter from the law firm and told him what I had learned. I watched his face carefully as I spoke. He listened without interruption, his expression shifting from professional calm to a deep, troubled concern. "I want to hire you, Dr. Thorne," I said finally, my voice steadier than I expected. "Not as my therapist. As a consultant. I need to understand the documents that were filed in my name. I need a professional to help me navigate this, ethically and quietly." He looked at me for a long moment, then gave a slow, deliberate nod. "I believe I have an ethical obligation to do so, Rowan. What your parents have described to me over the years, it does not align with what you are showing me now. Let's see what we can find." The next few months were a quiet, methodical excavation of my own life. With Dr. Thorne's guidance, I requested copies of every medical and legal document filed on my behalf since I was 15. The paperwork that arrived was a mountain. At the same time, on the recommendation of the law firm, I discreetly hired a forensic accountant, a sharp-eyed man named Ben Carter who operated out of a small office in Eugene. The picture that emerged was colder and more calculated than I could have imagined. Ben traced the money. Over 10 years, nearly $200,000 had been funneled from my trust into Serene Pathways Holistic Living. And when he dug into the company registration, the final piece clicked into place. Serene Pathways wasn't some independent entity. It was a limited liability company, an LLC. The principal owners listed on the incorporation documents were Richard and Helen Brooks. They hadn't just used my inheritance to pay for the care that kept me sedated and compliant. They had been paying themselves. The expensive retreats, the specialized therapists who echoed their narrative, it was all a circular flow of money, a self-sustaining ecosystem of control, funded by the legacy my grandfather had intended for my freedom. But that wasn't the worst of it. Ben discovered they had leveraged the trust to secure a business loan of nearly $150,000. They had used the assets, my assets, as collateral. They had founded a small, upscale property development company, Blossom Bay Properties, which had recently broken ground on a set of luxury condos overlooking the ocean. My name was on the loan agreement as a silent partner, my signature forged. I had been their patient, their fragile daughter, their burden. But I was also their secret, unwitting business partner. Their cash cow. The rage I felt then was a clean, purifying fire. It burned away the last vestiges of doubt, the last whispers of the girl who thought she was broken. I wasn't broken. I had been robbed. Dr. Thorne provided the final, heartbreaking piece of evidence. He had, as he'd mentioned, filed several reports with the state medical board over the years, expressing his concern that my treatment plan was not only ineffective, but potentially harmful. He had been ignored. But he had kept his personal notes, including audio recordings of his phone consultations with my parents, a practice he maintained for his own legal protection. He sat across from me in his office, his face grim. "I feel I must let you hear these, Rowan. You deserve the whole truth." He pressed play. First, my mother's voice, sweet and cloying. "Just keep her on the current regimen, doctor. If she starts feeling too good, she'll get ideas. She'll want to leave Port Blossom. We can't have that. It's not safe for her." Then, my father's, blunt and dismissive. "Look, Dr. Thorne, her grandfather was a sentimental old fool. Leaving that kind of money to a teenage girl with her head in the clouds? It was irresponsible. We are her parents. We are simply managing her resources in a way that is practical and ensures her long-term security. It is, for all intents and purposes, the family's money. The family's money." I didn't cry. I felt a profound, chilling stillness. The people whose voices I was hearing were strangers. They were not the parents I had loved, feared, and tried so desperately to please. They were architects of a decade-long illusion. "What do you want to do?" Eris asked gently, his eyes full of a sorrow that mirrored my own. I looked out his window at the gray sky, at the branches of a maple tree swaying in the wind. For the first time, I felt a sense of my own power, not as a weapon, but as a compass. It was pointing me toward a new shore. "I want my life back," I said. The confrontation was not a storm. It was a quiet, deliberate clearing of the air. A week later, I invited them for dinner at my small apartment. It was the first time they had come to my own space in years. They arrived bearing a pot of my mother's beef stew, their faces masks of cheerful parental affection. "Oh, this is a sweet little place, darling," my mother said, looking around my book-filled room. "It's good for you to have a bit of independence. As long as you're taking your medication, of course. You do look well. The color is back in your cheeks." I served the stew. We ate in a strained silence, filled only by their chatter about town gossip and the progress on their new condo development. I let them talk. I listened, really listened, for the last time, to the cadence of their self-deception. When they were finished, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I simply placed a thin file folder on the table between them. "I know," I said softly. My father frowned. "Know what, Rowan?" "I know about Grandfather Arthur's trust fund," I continued, my voice even and calm. "I know about the medical conservatorship you filed. I know that Serene Pathways Holistic Living is your company. And I know about the loan for Blossom Bay properties that you took out in my name." My mother's smile froze and then crumbled. She looked at my father, her eyes wide with panic. My father's face went rigid, a mask of cold fury. "You've been listening to gossip," he snapped. "You're having a paranoid episode." "Am I?" I asked. I reached into my bag and took out a small digital recorder. I pressed play. His own voice filled the small room, cold and clear. "It is, for all intents and purposes, the family's money." I stopped the recording. The silence that followed was absolute. My mother began to weep, not the soft, performative tears I was used to, but harsh, ragged sobs of genuine shock and fear. My father stared at the file on the table as if it were a snake. "This isn't about the money," I told them, my gaze steady on their shattered faces. "You can keep the money you've already taken. This is about the truth. This is about my life. You have 1 week. I want the conservatorship dissolved. I want my name off that loan. I want the remainder of the trust transferred to an account under my sole control. And I want all the medical records you've controlled to be sealed." "Rowan, please," my mother whispered through her tears. "We did it because we love you. You were so lost. We were scared." I looked at her, at this woman who had mistaken control for love, and felt a deep, aching pity. "You were scared of the person I was becoming," I said. "The person Grandfather Arthur saw in me. The person I'm going to be now." I stood up. 1 week. After that, this folder goes to the authorities, along with my testimony. It's your choice." They left without another word. The following days were a blur of legal activity. True to my word, I didn't pursue criminal charges. My goal wasn't vengeance, it was emancipation. It was about drawing a boundary so clear and so final that the fog could never roll in again. The loans were repaid from their own accounts, my name was cleared, and the remaining balance of the trust, a little over $300,000, appeared in a bank account that was mine and mine alone. The silence from my parents was absolute. I did not see them. I did not speak to them. The space they had once occupied in my life was now a quiet, open expanse. It was lonely, but it was a clean loneliness. It was the solitude of a reclaimed wilderness, ready for new growth. And the growth came. With the money my grandfather had left me, I didn't buy a fancy car or a big house. I bought a small, neglected building by the old fishing docks, a place with large, sea-facing windows and floors stained with paint and history. I renovated it, not into luxury condos, but into a community art space. I called it Arthur's Landing. It was a place for workshops, for local artists to display their work, a place for anyone who needed to find their voice through color and clay and creation. Dr. Eris Thorne, now a trusted friend, sat on the board of directors. My life found a new rhythm, one dictated by the tides, the needs of my small but growing community, and the stories I was finally telling through my own art. My paintings were no longer dark or sad, they were filled with the complex, beautiful light of the Oregon coast, the pearlescent glow of a misty morning, the fiery streak of a sunset over the water, the deep, resilient green of the forest after a storm. One afternoon, months later, as I was closing up the studio, I saw a familiar car pull up outside. My mother got out. She stood on the sidewalk for a long time, just looking at the building. She looked smaller than I remembered, her shoulders slumped. I braced myself, my hand resting on the cool wood of the doorframe. Slowly, she walked to the entrance. She didn't try to come in. She just stood in the doorway, her eyes scanning the art-filled space within. They landed on my latest painting, a large canvas that depicted a lone figure standing on a cliff, the fog behind her breaking apart to reveal a sunlit sea. Her gaze stayed on the painting for a long time. Her throat worked, but no words came out. Finally, she looked at me, and for the first time, I saw not a manipulator or a jailer, but a deeply flawed, frightened woman who had lost her way. "You would have been so proud, Rowan," she whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. "Arthur. He would have loved this." She didn't apologize. She didn't ask for forgiveness. But in that one fragile moment, she acknowledged the truth of who I was and the spirit my grandfather had so cherished. I nodded slowly. "Yes," I said. "I think he would have." She turned and walked back to her car, and I watched her drive away. I didn't know if our relationship could ever be repaired, if the trust that had been so profoundly shattered could ever be rebuilt. Some things, once broken, can only be mourned. But as I stood in the doorway of the studio I had built, breathing in the familiar, beloved scent of salt and turpentine, I knew that my own healing had already begun. The justice I had sought wasn't found in their punishment, but in my own liberation. It was in the feel of a paintbrush in my hand, in the sound of laughter echoing in the studio, in the quiet, unshakable knowledge that when I looked in the mirror, I no longer saw a fragile, broken thing. I saw the artist. I saw the poet. I saw the woman who had walked out of the fog and learned to paint her own light. And I knew, with a certainty as deep and vast as the ocean before me, that I was finally home.